Hello and welcome to this special bonus episode of The Dairy Edge. Teagasc are running a weekly Let's Talk Dairy webinar series, which is also being made available as a podcast. On this week's webinar, John Douglas joins Stuart Childs to give advice on how to build grass for autumn grazing.
So good morning everyone and welcome to this week's Let's Talk Dairy. So today I'm going to be talking with John Douglas of the Grass10 team. John has been on before with us. Today his topic is building for the future, which we were joking is very like a political slogan, but it's obviously it's important that we build covers during the autumn period in order to have grass for the remainder of the year, but it's also very important that we do it right in order to have grass for the springtime. And I suppose we've seen scenarios where people don't pay attention to the targets, we'll say, during the course of the autumn and leave themselves very short of grass for the springtime. And sometimes that goes against them, and more often than not it goes against them. The odd time they can get away with it. So I suppose it's like anything, you have to budget and you have to plan in order to be some way close to the mark in terms of hitting targets. So I've asked John to talk about the objectives of the Grass10 team in terms of autumn cover for the season that's coming up ahead of us. Ask any questions as you're going along for clarity or anything, and John will be happy to take them. So just briefly, John, you're going to talk about the current situation in terms of there's obviously soil moisture deficits in different parts of the country as well. Slightly eased maybe with some of the rain that came in the early part of this week, but in some cases, some places got no rain at all, so still in pretty tight situation. So we're just going to touch on that briefly at the start. So hand over to you. Thanks, John.
Hi, Stuart. John Douglas is my name. I'm working on the Grass10 team with John Maher and Joseph Dunphy. And sure, look, we're all about getting people to improve their grazing management and achieve grazing excellence, which, pays economically, but also, I suppose, from a social point of view and environmental point of view, it's more sustainable. I'll just start with the current pasture-based performance. So this is from our newsletter, our weekly newsletter that goes out. It's available on the Teagasc publications and on the website, on our Grass10 website. So if we just look at some of the figures there for the moment, the growth at the moment is 57 around the country, but again, that's an average. And it's probably a bit below average for this time of year. And as you can see on the map of Ireland down on the left-hand side, that's the current growth rates around the country. And figures in white, I suppose, are around average. They're in sort of plus or minus 10% of average. And those figures then in yellow are below 10% of the average. And the figures in sort of that orange-brown colour are below 20%, or 20% below the average. And the green then are above the average. So you can see there that there's a lot of counties, nearly all counties are probably below average growth. And I suppose recent rain, that mightn't account for some of the recent rainfall that fell earlier on the week. People haven't done a walk yet. So we should see a rise in some of those counties that did get rain. But there's still going to be a lot of areas more towards probably the east side of the country that didn't get enough rain and have very high soil moisture deficits that will probably require a couple of inches of rain really to get them back on track. So we're coming into a period where we're sort of switching from managing the wedge and looking at our cover per cow and our pre-grazing yield, where next month now we're moving towards, we're changing focus and we're moving towards building grass, so that we're more looking at your average farm cover on week to week and trying to extend rotation and build cover and build a bank of grass for the autumn time, and we'll go into why we do that. But there's a shift, and I suppose what maybe came up earlier in the week was that some farms are going to try, they need to start building grass from next week onwards, and they're not in a position because they're not grown. So look, that's going to make it more difficult and challenging, and maybe this year some farms might not be able to reach their optimum with the autumn grazing targets because of this. So, but hopefully I suppose we will get rain in the next week or 10 days, and that will alleviate that problem. But look, we'll have to deal with that as it comes. So I suppose if you look at the predicted growth rates, they are predicted to rise a little bit, and that's based on some of that rain that has fallen. So that's a good sign anyway. It's going in the right direction.
Well, John, at least they're kind of holding, with the exception of the rates, obviously they're kind of holding potentially in line with kind of demand that can be kind of matched with just grass and meal in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and you can see that there from the pasture-based data. There's about 15 kilos of grass and 3 kilos of meal going in. So while that meal is probably higher than normal, slightly higher than normal, yeah, as you say, Stuart, it is being filled mainly with just an increase in meal, I suppose,
Yeah,
to
very
hold
good.
that. So yeah, yeah. So will we move on then to the autumn?
We'll get into the meat of the matter for today. Yeah, super.
Yeah. So look, I'll just run through what we're going to go through. So we're going to go through the objectives of autumn grazing management. So why is it good for farmers? Do you know the benefits of reaching them? What the autumn grazing targets are, and then how do we meet them? Okay. So maybe some of this you've heard before, and try to put a different angle on it and try to get people to understand maybe more about autumn grazing and how to go about achieving the targets. So the objectives of autumn grazing, it's really a two-piece jigsaw. So the first piece is to build grass early in the autumn. So this is during August, September. This is the building phase. So this is the phase we're going to be focused on more today. And then later on in October, November is your closing phase. So you're trying to extend your days of grass in the autumn time, but also set the farm up that you have a good supply of grass in the springtime, because as we know, we get a better kick for it in the springtime. So that's important. So really what we're going to do over the next couple of weeks is going to have an influence on next spring. And you can see that there, that's the reason why, because if we don't build much grass, well then we're more than likely either going to stay out grazing later on lower covers and have no grass in springtime, or else we're going to have we could run the farm cover down very low even in October, and maybe still not get back up to have enough grass for the springtime. So this is really, as you mentioned at the start, Stuart, about budgeting and stuff like that. So it's important for every farmer to have a plan in place for this time of year. So I might just I suppose quiz people, like if they had an opportunity, if they could invest €40 now and be guaranteed €110 back in 3 months' time, how much would they invest? Okay, so you're going from €40 to €110. You're nearly tripling your money in 3 months. Okay, so that sounds maybe like too good to be true, but it's, we can guarantee it. And the reason I suppose we can guarantee it is if we look at the pasture profit index. So this is everyone's familiar when they're reseeding, they have a pasture profit index. Well, this is the breakdown of the different factors that build into the index, and one of the main ones obviously is the dry matter yield. And in the summertime, I suppose the cost of replacing grass in the summertime with a different feed is very low because grass is very plentiful. So it's sort of put down at 4 cents a kilo, or €40 a ton, if you like. In the autumn time, however, because it becomes more expensive to replace grass because there's probably less of it about, the value of autumn grass is much higher. It's 11 cents a kilo, or €110 per ton. So basically what we're trying to do here in this building phase is buy grass at €40 a ton and more or less sell it back to the cows, we'll say, in October, November at €110 a ton. So we're gaining that €70 there per ton on the farm, and that's what we should be trying to do. And there's a lot of money up for grabs here by doing it. But I suppose, as we'll see now, not everyone is following targets. Not people aren't reaching them, so they're actually missing out. So I think they're probably getting halfway with this. They're probably doing half their potential of their investment in this. That's all they're getting out of it at the moment. So there's a big potential here to make a lot more money at this. So extended grazing. So this is just taken from a Ballyhayes presentation there. I think maybe Donald Patton would have done it in previous years. So you can see here the green line is the daily pasture growth. So that's just the growth throughout the year. And then the red line is the herd demand throughout the year. And we can see from basically the second rotation onwards till sort of coming into middle of September, the growth is outstripping the demand the whole way through. So there's surpluses on the farm. But in the shoulders, I suppose, from February, March, and in early April and into late September, October, November, the herd demand is a lot higher than the growth. Okay, so one thing what we're trying to do here basically is we're sort of in some ways we're sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul here in August. So we're instead of maybe taking out the surplus grass in August as bales or as silage, we're basically building a bank of it up, letting it grow on the stem, and then having it available during, say, October and into November to graze. And I know heavy soils and dry soils are going to be different, but there's targets there for both, and everyone can, I suppose, improve their own performance. And I'm not going to get into a debate versus dry soils versus heavy soils. It's about, at the end of the day, each farm is different, and each farm improving their own performance. Okay.
I suppose, John, the big thing though is just like you said there. It's if we don't do that, if we don't start to act on it in the August period, it's very hard to make the cover last then, because you just don't have it in September.
Yeah, well, we can see here now Ballyhaise might have slightly lower growth rates in the shoulders, but you can see here around this is but early mid September, the growth rate is matching the demand, and that's probably a stocking rate of maybe 2.75 in Ballyhaise. So it's not it's not an overly high stocking rate. If they were stocked at 3 or 3.5, where a lot of farms are, you'd be back up towards maybe the 1st of September is where your if you like your anti-magic day, if on the opposite side of the year is happening. Okay, so then you're not going to build grass. And we talk about building grass. Again, we're going back to growing it at €40 a ton, and we don't want to grow it in September time or October time, where we're putting in silage, to replace trying to grow grass, which is not, it doesn't really pay for itself. It's probably a break-even exercise. When it pays is when we get to grow it cheap in August time, and we get to have the benefit of it then later on in the autumn time. Okay.
Yeah.
So you can see there, it's $270 per cow per day, extra day of grass in the springtime, and €180, so nearly €2 per cow in the autumn time. Okay. So the other benefits then that aren't touched, so they're more or less the economic benefits. So if we build the grass, it gets staying out longer. We've an extra €2 in the autumn, $270 in the springtime, but it doesn't account for the slurry storage. So this is, I suppose, a lot of farms are under pressure with slurry storage, and there's probably an extra couple of weeks on a lot of farms to get out and stay grazing, if not by day, for 2 or 3 weeks anyway, and that would have a big impact on the level of slurry capacity, I suppose, on the storage capacity on the farm. I know from working with farmers over the last few years of Grass10 who have followed the targets and built grass, and maybe traditionally were in around the first week of November on dry soils, and now staying out till the last week of November, and that's having a huge impact even in the springtime. It allows them to choose when to go with slurry in the springtime, rather than I suppose the date is open and you can go with it, and we'll go with it then. It allows that, and that's important for the water quality side of things and all going forward. So and then there's less to spread as well, so there's probably a saving in that. There's a lot less labor cleaning cubicles, feeding, all the other things that go along with cows being indoors. There's happier and healthier cows, generally leads to a happier, healthy farmer. I know one farmer was amazed at the peace and quiet he had during November when the cows were out, where traditionally they were in the shed. So he just had even a bit of peace and quiet around the yard and get more jobs done. The other benefits, I suppose, of following the targets is there's still plenty of grass for springtime when we close up properly in that second piece of the jigsaw that I was talking about earlier. And then also just from working with farmers, they're if they can get an extra 2 or 3 weeks out of grass because they're putting in a plan in place and have the infrastructure and the whole lot, they're getting better job satisfaction, and there's a bit of pride and there's a feeling of a job well done, which is important, I suppose, from the social aspect of the sustainability side of things. It's important that people are having that good intrinsic job satisfaction, if you like. So there are other benefits. And of course, just if you're looking at purely in the environment side, every additional week of grass reduces greenhouse gases emissions by 1%, and there's also lower ammonia emissions, because most of the ammonia emissions are related to slurry. So if the cows are urinating basically on concrete, and then there's loss there. When it's being stored in the tank, there's loss, and then when it's being spread, there's losses. So at grazing, it's a lot lower. So we're reducing ammonia emissions also. So there are the benefits. So just what has to happen, I suppose, from where we are now to maybe over the next week or two. So we're moving from these pre-grazing yields, pasture-based grass wedge, your cover per cow, your average farm cover, and those targets for the summer, and moving into your autumn time. So you're looking at your grass budget, so still using your average farm cover, but you're trying to build it rather than hold it at a level. You're looking at extending rotation length, so it's a time when maybe silage ground is coming back in, maybe people have receded ground coming back in, so we're able to extend rotation length that way. And then also you're looking, I suppose, really trying to come up with a target farm cover for your farm that works, and that might take you mightn't get that if this is your first year going to go about doing a grass budget, or your first year maybe measuring grass. you mightn't get it on your first year. You might follow the guidelines, and maybe you'll find that there was too much, or I started too early, I started too late. This could be a sort of a 2 to 3 year process until you get it right. But I suppose the benefits are there. We've seen them, so it's well worth doing. So
John, are you saying, so we'll say today's the 29th of July, basically once you hit the 1st of August, you're moving away from your cover per cow target really and looking at your average farm cover as your guide?
For some farms, yes, Stuart, it will be, yeah. And we'll go through that now, but basically it'll depend a lot, I suppose, on stocking rate and soil type and things like that. But I suppose one constant is that we keep walking the farm weekly. And, for those lower stock farms, they might be able they might get away with start building until, the 3rd week of August. But for the higher stock farms, really from next week onwards, they're going to have to start thinking about this. So when I say higher stock, they're probably talking about farms that are 3.5 or above, I suppose. Farms that are stocked around 3, probably into the 2nd week of August, and farms that are stocked closer to 2.5, probably the 3rd week of August. But again, these are guidelines, and if the growth is low 1 week, well then you're better off starting earlier in the week than later in the week. And if the growth is still high, you can maybe start at the end of the week rather than start the week. But there's a bit of flexibility in that, Stuart. But yeah, for higher stock farms, definitely should be looking at starting this next week. So if we actually look at the targets then, so these are set up based on stocking rate. So there's a 2.5, a 3, and a 3.5. So for the lower stock farms, you can see there, like the 1st of September target is 750 of an average farm cover, which is not a whole lot. If we look at the current pasture-based performance there at the minute, it's 710. So it's not a huge amount. So that's why they don't probably have to start building until about the 3rd week of August. Okay, and the rotation length and around that time should be around 30 days. So that's I suppose looking forward and looking back. So what we mean by that is if you have 90 acres and you're on a 30-day rotation, 1st September, you should be grazing 3 acres a day. So that's your rotation length. So it's not basically looking at pasture base and looking back to see what paddock was he in 30 days ago. It's more on that day. That's how much you should be grazing. And rotation length, from working with farms, we found rotation length even more so. When it's I suppose maybe when it's combined with average farm cover, that's when you get the most impact. So farm cover based off even a lower rotation length, sometimes it can seem to disappear a little bit quicker. So it's just that time factor, allowing paddocks to rest, and that helps coming into the autumn time. Okay. But if we look at on the 1st September, the stocking rate of 3, they need to be at close to 1,000 of an average farm cover, somewhere between 900 and 1,000. So they've a couple of hundred extra of an average farm cover to build, and so that really means they need to start, at least I suppose a week earlier, 10 days earlier, to get that in. And that'll depend on the difference between the growth and the demand at the time. But walking weekly will allow us to monitor and track this. And if we look at the farm, the stocking rate of 3.5, it's similar. It's close to 1,000 as well. So the reason we can't go much more than that, I suppose, Stuart, is we start to run in with issues of building too much cover and having very heavy covers and not being able to graze them out well, and then they're very slow to recover. So some farms that are grazing last year, I see maybe grazing covers of 2.5 to 3,000 towards the end of September, didn't actually get back into those paddocks. So effectively they started closing maybe a week earlier than what they normally had planned, because they let covers get too heavy. So there is a fine balance in this. Okay.
So you're just talking there, John, in terms of paddock recovery post grazing more so than anything else.
With the heavy covers, yeah, and of course, if you get a bad week and they're due to come into grazing, you're going to have a tough time trying to graze them. So we're trying to keep paddocks, I suppose, somewhere between 2,500 at a maximum. And look, if we look at the heavy soils, then we're not even going that far. We're building to a max of 900 kilos of dry matter per hectare. So even some of the heavier soils that are higher stocked, they could probably be 10 days behind, or 10 days, 2 weeks behind the targets here, because they only want to be at that 900, we could say mid-September time. So they'll have to walk the farm and just make sure they're not building too much too quick. So really what this comes back to, Stuart, is rather than saying I need to grow extra grass in August, you're going to put out similar, everyone maybe is going to put out similar rates of fertilizer during August, but the thing is, the lower stock farms, they might take out, for another week or two, they'll have time to take out a couple of extra paddocks and get some swards cleaned up before the autumn time. Whereas the higher stock farms, once they, come to a date that they're going to start building, they don't take out any more surplus. And this is the change of focus we're talking about. We're moving away from pre-grazing yields and cover per cow. So, if you're stocked at 3.5 in the middle of August, and your cover per cow, we'll see from the target there, should be 220. If a farmer is at 220 and he feels he has 2 or 3 days too much grass there and he's tempted to take out a paddock, well, then that's going to set him back a week or so. So he's not going to reach the target. So it's just that mindset that no, I'm building now. I'm not taking out surpluses. I'm building now, and it's just to get into that change. So that's what's important.
But John, is it still, there's two question from myself first, and then there's a question in there from Conor Creedon as well. It's still important to keep an eye on that average farm cover, and if it is running ahead of you, that you're going to have to do something maybe in that August phase still, though. Ideally now we want to avoid it, but if it's really getting away from you, you can't just let it build away, because it is just going to be too difficult to handle.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I suppose walking the farm weekly is the only way you're going to know that, Stuart. And that's why while the targets here are changing, everything's changing. The key message here is really to keep walking the farm through August and September weekly. So 8 walks basically between August and September. If we looked at the average in August, September, it's probably closer to 4 or 5, over that period. So how are you supposed to keep track of this if you're not doing it? And even by walking in, I suppose you're keeping focus. But yeah, if you are ahead, look, if you're 50 ahead, or and there's another good week coming of growth, well then you probably should do something, maybe take out a surplus. But if you're 100 ahead, but you're anticipating or predicted growth aren't to be that high for next week, well then I'd probably wait, because I mightn't build much in the week coming.
Yeah,
so
a bit like 2 weeks ago there, when people knew growths were going low, they left farm cover probably a little bit higher than you'd like it to be, but they ate into it then in the dry week.
Well, that's the smart thing to do. They're anticipating the changes coming, and they're allowing for that in the plan.
Yeah. Okay, so just a question from Conor there is, where's the balance for equality and regrowth then? And he's just, you were saying about the 2-2 covers,
so that's look, covers of the guidelines have always been, don't let covers get over 2,400 kilos of dry matter per hectare. That's the cover. So
there's the caveat with that, I suppose, John, in that has to be a clean 2-4.
Yeah. So that's another thing. It's where you're building the covers. So if grass quality this summer has been very challenging, even on the most experienced grassland managers this summer. It sort of, a lot of places went to seed and went ahead around that sort of June bank holiday time when the rain came, or late May, after that dry period, and everywhere sort of had, between bales and maybe some pre-mowing or topping, whatever other things were going on, everywhere was cleaned up. But then we got sort of a second mini drought, and that sort of caused things to go, or even after the last rain in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a lot of, as you call them there on Tuesday, Stuart, Trawnines coming, and a lot of stem coming back in the swards, not even around dung pads, just an even spread of stem across the swards at maybe covers of 1,000. And we're going to have to get them cleaned up. So that's probably one thing before we start building, or even if paddocks aren't that well grazed out for higher stock farms, really they need to go and get those cleaned up in the next week or so, because you don't want to build a cover of, we'll say 2,400 on top of a sward that has a lot of dung pads and stuff in it. It has to be a nice clean base to do that, you'd probably rather graze a cover of 2,400 of aftergrass type grass versus a cover of, we'll say 1,700-1,800 of a poor quality sward. It'd probably be easier to graze the heavier cover. So it's not just about what cover's on it, it's where it's grown from as well. So get paddocks cleaned up before we start building is the message there.
Yeah.
We had a poll there, Stuart. Were you able to set it out there? Maybe
I've just sent it out there now, so
okay.
You can just talk your way through it there, John. So I would say the reason that, I suppose we're just asking, do people follow autumn grazing targets, yes or no? And if not, why not? Because I suppose we're just trying to geez, I
Just
got
get a
right
yeah,
there.
get a
One person answered it there. I thought we 100% of people said they didn't understand it. I was getting worried there for a second.
Okay. Well, will we leave that
We'll
go
leave
and
it
let
there,
them?
and you can
Yeah,
talk away for a minute, sure, yeah, and we can come back to it.
yeah. So just we'll keep going on with the target. So this is pasture-based data from 2019. So we can see here in the middle of August, which is sort of around the time a lot of farmers are starting to build. Everyone is on target. The farms that are lower stocked are well above target. The farms that are 3 and 3.5 are about on target. So no problems there in terms of following the targets. If we look a month ahead, then the 15th of September, so everything was on track. Everything is behind track. So even the lower stock farms are behind track. So they've built. We'd say the lower farms have went from about 730 to 880. So they've built 150, and they probably should be another 150 to 200 ahead. So each farm there is probably about 150 to 200 behind. So when I said at the start there about you know basically investing your 40 euro a ton now and getting 110 back. This is where I said that farmers are only using about half that potential, Stuart, is that they're building maybe 150 to 200 onto it when they should be going sort of 300 to 400 on top of what they should be doing. So they're only getting about halfway there to meet the targets. Now, some of that is there's obviously heavy soils farms, and there's other farms on pasture base that mightn't be following the targets or whatever, or so it's just it mightn't be wholly accurate, but it gives you a good trend or a good guideline trend as to we need to be doing more work on this on building. So there's huge opportunity there, on farms like that's they're missing out days of grass there, and that's missing out on money. So this needs to be tackled.
And in a way, John, then as well, I suppose they might be missing a huge amount in autumn sometimes, but they continue to graze into cover that they don't have as such, and then they leave themselves quite short for the spring, so put themselves under a lot of pressure in the spring nearly as a result then as well. So this really is a critical point in terms of grassland management, both for both autumn and spring.
So if we looked at growth rates and stocking rates on the different demand per hectare based on different stocking rates, the reason you start earlier on the higher stocked is because the difference between the growth and the demand over that longer period is required to build up to that cover, and obviously the lower stock farms then can start a couple of weeks after that and they'll still reach the targets, but because their demand is lower, they can build I suppose quicker, and they can build into September, as you were talking about. They can still build grass in early September. But if we look at the average, you need basically, I suppose, a difference of probably 12 between the growth and demand for about 30 to 40 days to sort of do that, So that's adding 300 to 400 onto your average farm cover off after the summertime if you're not moving into autumn. But what we're looking at here is basically there's only a difference of 6. So it's not that farms really are growing any less grass. We sort of presume they're not growing any less grass because the growth rates are still good. We have growth rates from pasture base, but it is a fact that they're not changing from summer to autumn quick enough, that we're still looking at the cover per cow pre-grazing yield, and we're not starting early enough. And that's what that really is telling, that graph is telling us.
August to be classified as a month of the kind of the autumn as opposed to the summer kind of period. So
yeah. It should be in terms of management, but like in terms of growth rates, it's still, August can grow every bit as good as July. And that's why it makes it so, such a profitable thing to go and build grass, is because the growth rates are so high still.
Okay, I don't know, do you want to have a quick look at the results there and just so of 13 respondents, 46% or 6 out of the 13 said that they do follow, and 7 said no. And then in terms of if not, why not, 15% or 2 said they don't need to. The same again then for don't understand it enough. And by far and away the biggest response is 69% says that weather makes it difficult to manage grazing heavy covers. So
okay, so
yeah,
no, it's good to note that, because we might have to work more on that and focus more on that side of things. So Yeah,
Just
so
before you
look,
go on to that,
that
so there's a question in there as well now, John. Do you recommend pre-mowing or topping to tidy up paddocks before we start building, or are there any other ideas around it? From Damien Bergen.
Yeah, well, so look, if you're lower stocked and you're not starting till the third week of August, you have a full rotation really between now and then to go, and take out surplus. If that's your first protocol. If you're higher stocked, I'd be just going in. Look, I don't know. It's probably the farmer's choice and maybe the weather conditions at the time, whether you go pre-mowing or topping. Look, pre-mowing, you probably are cutting it a couple of days before you're going to top it. That might help growth, but it's a case. I know in some of the drier farms you shouldn't be pre-mowing top, and we're sort of going against that because of basically of drought or lower growth rates. So, but at the same time we're trying to look ahead, and I think at the moment we just have to because growths are low anyway. I think mowing or topping isn't going to slow down things that much on those farms, because you're going to have a lot of grass coming back together on those farms that are hit with drought, like you always have after a period of low growth rates. You've got a lot of grass coming back together. So, but yeah, we would advise
basically what you're saying, John,
them up.
is every method employable basically should be employed to try and make sure that you're building off a clean ground. So whether that is pre-mowing or topping, or even a little bit of baling in the next week or 10 days.
Some farmers maybe that are on maybe 24, 36 hour paddocks, and some of those paddocks have gone a little bit stemmy. Maybe even just putting the wire up and getting them to try and clean them out. I know some farmers have done that, and paddocks basically you wouldn't think that the cows would have cleaned out. They cleaned them out very well after, so we can do a bit of grazing as well and graze hard on some of them as well.
Yeah.
So just looking at the tools for autumn management, you're looking at the weekly farm walk and pasture base. I've mentioned that numerous times, and that is probably the number one thing. And there's a lot of benefits to that. So we're getting our growth rates for the autumn time for our farm, which in the future, we can use those growth rates for our own farm to make our own decisions about when to start building and what covers to build to. Okay, so that's really long-term thinking. Good strategy there is to keep walking the farm weekly till at least the end of September, and then you're also keeping your focus for this year as well. So we're looking at the grass budgets, and we'll come to the grass budgets now in a bit. But that's basically, I suppose it's basically, if you like, for want of a better word, it's an Excel which shows you, I suppose, based on your growth and the demand on the farm, how much you're going to build to, and how much you can, or how you can stretch it out, or when you can stretch it out to. So it's a good tool, good grazing infrastructure, and that probably tied in with good grazing management, or I suppose grazing management skills, if you like, Stuart, is probably something that needs to be improved on a lot of farms, and that's maybe some of the reason why we had some respondents there just saying that the wet weather is making it too heavy to graze some of these covers. There's also probably a thing there in that, Stuart, like if farmers aren't measuring as much coming into the autumn time, maybe they're letting some of those covers get too heavy on them. Maybe what they think is sort of 2,500 could be a 3,000, and maybe they're getting caught out a little bit that way too.
I think that has to be a case, Chancellor. I mean, if you talk to John Maher or even Joseph or yourself, probably see it a good bit with the groups, that even people that are engaged with you at grass groups are probably underestimating cover sometimes. And if that does happen, and as you said, if they maybe don't walk for a period of 2 or 3 weeks, and next thing suddenly does a cover gone well ahead of them, they're kind of caught between, they can't actually go and take it out. They need to go and graze it, but they make a bags of it trying to graze it then, because maybe it's in the wrong place. And like that grazing infrastructure and your positive mindset comment there, like, I mean, where you want to build those heavy covers, which, as you said the other day, you're only going to be grazing for maybe a week or 10 days anyway. They need to be just in places where you are going to be able to graze them, like.
Yeah, they really are. And so I suppose you have to build them off a clean base and pick your best fields to put them into, and be flexible. The weather obviously can be changeable around that time of year. So if it's coming a wet week, you don't go in, you don't go into them, or if you know it's going to be coming wet in 2, 3 or 4 days, you get in and start them as quick as possible and try and get some of them mowed out of it, grazed out of it. Don't want to confuse people here saying mow. We get some of them grazed out of it, so you have to be flexible with that. And then when the weather comes wet, then you move into your lighter covers for a week or so, and you go back. So there's a plan, and there's flexibility, and I suppose it all comes back to you're earning, I suppose, that extra money you're talking about making at Days of Grass. You do have to earn it a little bit to some extent, but yeah, you do make more money. That's, if you want to do that, this is what you do, I suppose then, come back to the knowledge, and that ties in with maybe the skills or the grazing skills as well. So you've the knowledge of, where your rotation end should be, what your target should be as you move through the autumn. Okay, so how to build grass. So basically, we're trying to grow more grass now. Grow grass now that we need to eat later on. And we're basically, I suppose, manipulating supply and demand to achieve this. And this is where the budgets come in, and they're a lot more accurate. So there's ways why we can increase the supply of grass. So not just maybe the growth, but more so the supply. So, and when, I suppose this comes back to the big thing, when we start is going to have a big influence on this. So if we were trying to increase the grass supply in sort of mid-September to the 1st of October during that peak targets, we need to start on time in August. So again, I'll reiterate, the higher stock farms should be starting the first week, the sort of farm stocked around 3 the second week, and the farm stocked around 2.5 into the 3rd week of August as a guideline. Okay, that's when you need to be starting. Obviously then, to increase supply, you can increase the grazing area. Maybe there's stock to be moved on, maybe there's silage ground coming back, reseeded ground coming back. We can obviously have our fertilizer up to date and out, so we're going to get a better response from our fertilizer out in early August than we are in early September. So, what we see in maybe a lot of farms is, especially maybe the farm stocked at 2.5, they have an awful lot of grass because there's silage ground coming back, and there seems like an awful lot, and they hold off on fertilizer to maybe the 1st September time, and then they go, but they're only going to get about 2/3 the response then as they would in August. Okay, so just be clever with that. Now, obviously, you don't want to go too hard and run into too many surpluses, but you have to find a balance there with that. And I suppose probably for farms, I know a lot of farms have delayed fertilizer over the last couple of weeks, so 20-25 units out maybe across the farm now, and you're probably going to top up those fields that you graze sort of up until sort of mid late August. You're probably going to top them up as you go along, and then anything I suppose after we say mid late August is probably just going to get one fertilizer application, then maybe a blanket spread around then, because you're going to have some paddocks maybe they're going to get it twice more, and some are only going to get it once. So the ones that are going to get it once maybe go a little bit heavier. The ones that are going to get twice maybe just cut back and go 2 lighter of application. So little and often is best with it if we can. Look, then increasing supply, more long-term issues are soil fertility, reseeding, measuring on pasture base. They're going to be big factors in that. And again, I suppose we're talking about increasing the supply. So if we can only graze down to 5 or 6 centimeters because the quality of the sward is poor, versus 4 centimeters because the quality is high, well then effectively we've an extra 500 kilos of dry matter after being utilized on that. So there's a way to increase your supply as well. So that's why you have to have a clean sward. Reducing your demand. So we can increase our supply, so we can also reduce our demand. So we can reduce our stocking rate. So how do we do that? We remove maybe younger stock or other stock that are on the platform a bit quicker. We maybe get rid of some cull cows. We maybe increase silage as we go into maybe not so much August, but maybe heading towards September. You might put in some silage to stretch it. I know there's zero graze, and a lot of people are looking at them options in the shoulders of the year for maybe for a week or so. It may have some, but this was the effect. The thing is, there when you're increasing any supplement into the diet, we still have to keep track of what's going on the farm, because we know we don't want to let the cover build too much if we're putting in a lot of feed, because we run into the issues we're after talking about. Meal also can be increased, and it's probably an okay thing for some farms, for a couple of weeks. But if we're talking about building and stretching grass, it's the forage coming into the extra, or the additional forage coming in. It's going to make the big difference rather than meal, because it has a better substitution effect than meal. So.
Okay, so John, just to clarify as well there, we'll say when you're talking about the reducing demand, we say they were stocked at 4 cows or 4 livestock units to the hectare at the moment, with stock on the extra stock on the platform. What stocking rate are you targeting now for your autumn closing cover? We'll say, are you just targeting on what you will be on the 1st of September or the middle of September with the cows only, when everything else is gone. You know, like we'll say for the month of August, there's a chance that there's going to be stock on the platform that are eventually going to be gradually maybe moving away. So what stocking rate are you actually building for in that scenario?
Yeah, well, I suppose I'd be building for the stocking rate that it probably when they're gone, Stuart. So if it goes back to 3, I'd be using the 3 targets. But then, you still might have to start a bit earlier, because if the stocking rate's going to be 4 for August, but it goes back down to 3 for September time, effectively you're eating more grass in August
time. Demand throughout August, yeah.
Yeah, so you might still start the same time.
Yeah.
But you'll be using the targets for the lower stock farm, if you like. But you're going to hit the targets, but you're just going to do it a bit differently,
Yeah.
So stocking rate factor. So I suppose there's a couple of things within this. So farms, we'd say stocked less than 2.8 in or around. There's obviously a lower stocking rate. You have a lower demand. So as we can see from that graph, middle of August, the average farm cover target was way ahead. So there is obviously, it's easier to build grass because the growth doesn't have to be as high, and we can build it. But as we see there, those farms are still missing the targets later on, and they can still have a low grass supply in the springtime. And we were just doing an exercise with the dairy advisors in service train, where we picked farms, and there was a lower stock farm on dry soil, but still was very short in grass in the springtime. So we can see, just because you're a dry farm or just because you're low stocking rate, not everything works out. There has to be a plan in place for this to work. And if we look at farms maybe stocked over 3.5 livestock units per hectare, obviously higher stocking rate, higher demand. So, is the building to the targets going to be a benefit? And I suppose what I mean by that, for you to build to the targets, if say you're stocked at 4, like your example, Stuart, and you want to build to the targets, well, you're probably not going to grow any more than what you're eating in August time. So effectively, you're not really building that much. So is it a benefit then to go and try and put in extra supplement in August to avoid having to put it in November? And, if we just look down there below, the higher stock farms they're basically buying grass at 11 cent a kilo in August time and selling at 11 cent a kilo in October, November. So it's sort of a break-even exercise. And I suppose by that, I mean, like if you have to put in, say, 3 kilos of silage and 3 kilos of meal versus maybe 2 kilos of meal on the lower stock situation, if you averaged out the price or the cost of that diet in cent per kilo, it's probably around 11 cent a kilo, which is more or less the benefit of it later on in the year. So it's a break-even exercise. So really what we're trying to do on the higher stock farms, so farms stocked over 3.5, is just holding rotation length. So still sort of starting next week, but if you can do maybe a 35-day rotation and another 35-day and then a 30-day rotation, sort of 35 days rotations, you're sort of getting 90, 100 days from early August will bring you up to early November. And really the closing rotation there, holding that 30 days in the last rotation is key for the springtime in terms of not running the farm cover down too low and setting up the farm for the springtime. So if we look at the lower stock farms, they're buying the grass at 4 cent a kilo in August and selling it to the cows for 11 cent a kilo in October, November. So you're making money there in that situation. So really, this building grass, it only should really, I suppose, happen when your stocking rate is feasible enough for you to actually build it without taking out any more surpluses, rather than building it by having to put in extra supplement.
So what you're saying there, the 3.5 plus basically is you just want to hold what grass you have and make sure that you can extend your grazing season by keeping a tab on it all the way through, rather than actually trying to build a big cover, which you're just not going to do anyway. Yeah,
we'll see that here in the budget. So, look, there's I suppose, farm stocked at 3, feeding 2 kilos of meal in August. The average growth we'd say was 60. Demand is 48. So every week during August, that average farm cover is rising by 90, or in a month's time, it's about 360 of an increase in farm cover. So that's why we have to start in August time, because if we move into September time, maybe the average growth is only 50, which is about more or less only meeting the demand. So we're not going to build. So that's why we need to start in August. I think I've made that clear enough. But so we're going to look at a couple of budgets now. So a farm stocked at 3.1. Farm stock at 3.1, but basically I suppose a higher stocking rate at the start because there's ground out for reseeding time, which is happens on a lot of farms this time of year. And we look at a grass budget for farm stock to 2.5 and one stocked at 4 cows per hectare. Okay, so so the farm stock to 3.1, we can see here. So this is the budget for anyone not familiar. It's basically week by week. It's broken down. This is the area of the farm on the platform. This is the number of spring milkers. This is their grass intake, meal intake, silage intake, and we can sort of basically put it in each week. And what we're doing is manipulating this demand, and that will sort of, I suppose, match up with the growth, and whatever the surplus or deficit is each week will be added or subtracted onto the average farm cover. So it's a good way of being able to, plan ahead and track the farm cover as to how much meal or silage needs to go in at different stages to meet the autumn grazing targets and objectives. Okay, and this is what all the farmers now who've been measuring on pasture rates for the last couple of years are moving on to doing these budgets, and it's really helping them. So we can see here, a farm stocked around 3. If they start, I suppose, basically not take out any surpluses, they can build comfortably enough. By late August, they can hit their targets there, 1100, and they eat into that. And they might have to introduce some silage, I suppose, later in October time, just to stretch it out. And with that, on a dry farm, we'd say they're getting up to sort of maybe the third week of November before they're housing, and then they're closing up with a cover there on around the 2nd of December of 750. Okay, so that's a nice simple plan. So there's a farm stock of 3, very comfortable to do it. I suppose it's just a case that farm didn't take out anything. I suppose what you can see in the budget is maybe what the farmer didn't do, and what the farmer didn't do in this case was take out any surpluses that he thought or that he might have normally taken out if he was following the summer targets. Okay, so we can see there over the course that there was 40 ton of meal, nearly 40 ton of meal fed and 25 ton of silage fed. So all the area of each farm here is going to be the same. The only difference is the number of cows. Okay. So if we're looking at the same farm, but they have a higher stocking rate for the next few weeks because there's ground out for reseeding time. In this case, there's going to be more meal fed, so you're feeding 3 kilos of meal from most of it, 4 or 5 in some instances, and that's so we're sort of keeping silage out during the building phase anyway, and there's some going in at the back end of the year, and those cows are housed a week earlier, so that by having that ground out for reseeding even during August time, is sort of having an impact later on down the line. So there's a week less grazing there, and there's close on 48 ton of meal and 28 ton of silage. So there's another 7 ton of meal and nearly another 4 ton of silage there. So for that farm, taking out that 5.7 hectares, 13 acres for reseeding was actually costing about €30 a cow or €3,000. That was the extra cost of doing that. So these are sort of hidden costs, Stuart, that we probably don't see or probably don't, account for on farm. And maybe in that instance, the farmers wouldn't be worried about hitting the autumn grazing targets and maybe wouldn't put in that extra, but then there might be 2 or 3 weeks less grazing at the end of it, So there's different ways of seeing that. But for about myself and Joe were talking about yesterday, and roughly for every 0.1 yet you increase the stocking rate by over, we'd say 2.5, you're adding sort of an extra €150 to €200 per hectare onto your costs in the autumn time.
Okay.
If we look at the amount of meal and silage that has to be fed in the different budgets.
Yeah.
Even going from I think there was an extra 12 cows and an extra 14 ton of meal fed. There's an extra ton of meal for each of those extra cows, basically. Yeah. So it's maybe something that we should be focusing more on, and I suppose that's why if you're higher stocked and you can't get those days of grass, that's when that extra meal and extra silage is being costed into the system, so.
Okay, very good. So thanks a million, John, for coming on, and thanks for holding the fort there for those few minutes while I was gone AWOL.
No worries.
So it's a very important topic, and I suppose we're probably not delivering on it enough at farm level in terms of actually trying to achieve the targets, or we're going about it the wrong way, or we're not starting soon enough. So I suppose, like you said, it's probably a project over a number of years, maybe to try to get your head in line with where you need to be, try to achieve it, then maybe learn from some of the mistakes that you might make and as you're going along. And every year is different, of course, as well. Like, we're starting off from a low base now this year. things could turn around very quickly depending on where you are. Like if you're after getting rain, you could have a very strong growth rate, which could put you in a very strong position nearly too quickly. So people have to have that flexibility. And I suppose the very important thing then is that people actually have a plan in place in first place, and then try to manage their targets to fall in line with that plan as the year goes on. And obviously that flexibility and being smart about where you're putting those heavy covers that you are going to have to graze for that week or 10 days in September. And as you said, maybe watching the weather that you go there when you know you can, rather than going there when you have to go there maybe, and if the weather is against you, making it that bit more tricky to do it. So I suppose talk to your advisor in relation to setting up your plan, going through the budget. Definitely for the first time going through that, you're going to need assistance, and maybe even for the first number of years, even going through that, you're going to need assistance to build that budget. And it's a good idea actually, John. I know we didn't probably talk about it much here now today, but to actually run that budget through out until the 1st of February next year, it can often help to show the effect of continuing to graze for too long as well.
Or even to even to the start of the second rotation, which is what Donald Patton will do. Like he'll run it through to maybe the 10th of April or 14th of April next year, to show the influence of not building now and what influence it has in the springtime.
Yeah, stay safe, and thanks again, John, for coming on.
That's all for this week's Let's Talk Dairy webinar series, and don't forget to look out for more bonus episodes each week. I'll be back with our usual Dairy Edge interview on Monday, so do listen in then. I'm Emma Louise Coffey, and thanks for listening.